Please welcome co-founder and president of LNS Research, Matthew Littlefield.
Wow, that was fast. 2.5 days of world-class research, collaboration, insights, and discussions. I hope you all are able to take back actionable insights from today's discussions and yesterday's discussions that you can apply to your businesses. So my main takeaway from this event is one of positivity and bullishness. I did give some stark warnings yesterday, but the set of leaders that I saw over the past week and your passion to drive change in the organization is inspiring. I do see success in our future. The thing that I took away really was that a common vision and a common purpose can drive a pace of decision making and a mindset shift much faster than any of us realize can happen. And that speed, I think, will be critical over the coming years. And so this idea around action brings us to our final panel, Analytics to Action. I have great admiration and respect for every one of these panelists. I think for most of you, this will be the highlight of the event because you will get to really synthesize everything you saw over the past 2.5 days and bring that back to your own businesses. So I have the great pleasure of introducing our first panelist and moderator. So Bob Francis, research analyst here with LNS Research, is our moderator. I've known Bob for over 15 years. Tremendous history in the space. Really one of the first thought leaders and evangelists for APM. He now leads our autonomous operations research. Very excited to have him. And then also Dr. Lisa Graham, truly a triple threat in the industry. She has an amazing set of experiences in the industry, a true analytics expert, and a motivational leader. So very excited to welcome them both to the stage and the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, excited to kick off this afternoon session, welcoming our attendees here and those watching on the live stream. Lisa, why don't we get things going with just learning a little bit more, for those that haven't met you, a little bit more about yourself and Seek.
Okay, thanks, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad that there's so many of you still here for the last session of the day. A little about myself. I'm a chemical engineer at heart. Started my career in the chemicals industry back when Union Carbide ultimately became Dow, if any of you were around, remember that time. And then spent about 20 years in pharma and life sciences. And I would say that regardless of which field I've been in, including a brief stint as an intern in pulp and paper, so some fond memories of the plant and everything there, is the need for better measurements, the need for better process analytical technology, and ultimately data analytics. So that's really been a thread in my entire professional career.
Fantastic. So tell us about Seek. What is driving change and how is your organization responding?
Okay, absolutely. So for those of you who might not know about Seek, it is essentially a fully remote company. We have been from the very beginning. And so when we talk about workforce and we talk about how to drive culture change, we very much like to have that as a starting point with any organization that we're working with. And so our employees, contractors, it's worldwide, and Seek delivers advanced analytics software for process manufacturing data. And so simply put, we get up every day and work with organizations who are really wanting to utilize advanced analytics to have improved operational productivity and better business outcomes. And I can chat a little bit about that.
Please.
So the slide that we have up, when we think about business outcomes, it's a pretty broad term. But what I heard a lot of in the last day or so, day and a half, are people talking about, no, we need to drive this change. We need to make this improvement. And then along the way, well, we can't do that without our people. So when we talk about advanced analytics at Seek, what we're talking about is workforce transition underneath everything. It's not a solution or a simple technology that solves everything we're talking about. It's the combination of these applications plus a mindset shift that happens. And so at Seek, for example, we've had 10,000 people trained on advanced analytics. And quite often we end up talking about not just our own application that we provide, but just how to think about how to ask business questions. I would say a lot of the workforce seems to be voting with their feet these days. They want to work somewhere where they can drive a better planet. And so sustainability is another area where Seek feels very, I would say we're humbled to be part of that conversation. For example, Syngenta uses Seek to track emissions path to net zero. So that's a real world impact, and that can be very compelling to the workforce. And then finally, of course, this broader digital transformation. The ability for an engineer who spent 4 years in school, sometimes 7 or 8, sometimes they've gone on to get a master's, and now they can show up, and do we want them spending hours in Excel or track and paper or data entry? I love the 3Ds, one of the analytics session, dull, dirty, dangerous jobs. So if we can use digital transformation so that those engineers show up and they actually get to do something that they feel is valuable, that can save a lot of money, to me that's a starting foundational piece as we debate how to really recruit and retain talent.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
So you were chief operating officer, and then you moved to the CEO desk. I assume you've been out meeting with lots of customers who have a lot of the problems that we've talked about in our sessions this week. So what trends have you picked up as you've been out meeting with customers?
Oh, it's a great question. Yes, and it's actually a large reason why I came here. Really value the opportunity that LNS provides to pull us all together so we can have these conversations. I would say one very important theme is it's really hard to change. And when we say that, it's, almost every customer we work with is first deciding what to change, how to get others on board with that change, and then ultimately how to make that change happen. And so we see a lot of trends towards let's pick something specific. Let's get a business outcome. Let's solve that. And then let's try that a few more times. And then ultimately we can start to roll things out. A little bit more successful approach than let's try to solve the whole data problem. It's sometimes hard to get everybody on board if you say, bear with us for about 5 years while we get the data organized.
Right.
I don't think that's going to work so much. So we see a lot of, I would say, a collaboration between top leadership with the people that are responsible for the day-to-day change. So customers who are pulling together. So it's not a top-down driven solution, but it's not just relying on grassroots without thinking about how to reward, that grassroots behavior that you can see in it means people have to try learning, and not everything's going to work. So how an organization is responding to that, either encouraging that or discouraging that, and so some trends.
So part of what we've discussed this week is this concept of crossing the chasm in an IX program, that there are things that work in the early stages and through a pilot, but then a pivot in people, in process, and technology takes place in order to get that adoption and see that adopted across our staff, our people across the enterprise, and then that becomes embedded in the culture. And those of us that have been in the software business for a while know that a big part of that is user adoption. So tell us about, I call it the feedback loop. As you said, train 10,000 users on Seek. Tell us about how you and your team collect feedback for improvement, and then how that goes into your development cycle and comes out in the next edition of the software.
Oh, great question. So one thing that's, I think, been a big learning for us is figuring out how to best support learning inside our customers. So how do people want to learn? And what time do they have to learn? Because the idea, we used to get on airplanes prior to the pandemic, and you'd show up and people get pulled in for an 8-hour session. Well, they don't have time for an 8-hour training session, and it wasn't necessarily the most effective to get on airplanes. So when the pandemic arrived, largely I think because we'd been already virtual and working virtually, we introduced a different approach. So very short vignette training sessions that people could attend virtually. So it was much more amenable to balancing what they do day to day. It also brought some cross-functional networking opportunities for customers who wouldn't normally see each other if it was site-based. But also what we see is a continued pivot towards they don't necessarily want to sit in a classroom even on Zoom either. So how can we pivot the product to have more self-guided learning? Even things like Google, in Google videos and YouTube. And so we're continuing to take customer feedback on how they want to learn, what's the most effective way to help them gather additional analytic skills, but in a way that's conducive to what they want to do.
Excellent. What we've heard a lot from this week with all the different companies and different industries represented here is people are at different places on that journey. And so I'm curious, we hear a lot of talk, about the hyperscalers and all the cloud technology that's available. So when you go in and meet and you encounter people that are maybe farther along in that journey and already have all their data sitting in AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, tell us about that interaction with the hyperscalers and those that are maybe a little bit farther down the road in terms of their data infrastructure and have a cloud set up already.
Yeah, okay. So there's kind of two pieces to that. One is thinking about flexing with the IT strategy. So I'm not sure if it's ever done, right? If we're ever going to be done. There's always going to be this evolution of how the data should be stored, protected, managed. And so right now we see a lot of migration to leveraging the clouds. And so that's very important from a Seek perspective. We do partner with the major cloud providers. We recognize a number of our customers have a multi-cloud strategy. And so we tend to take the stance of, okay, what's best for our customer? So remaining agnostic in the sense that we will flex with your IT strategy. And that's core to Seek. Ignoring the cloud for a second, we believe there was a need to bring a software that could decouple the IT and OT constraints. So OT needs access to their data right now. Not in a week, not next year, not when some data strategy is finished. They need it now. But there is a very real IT requirement that data be safe and protected and managed. And so we at Seek sit on top of all these different data sources today, right? You install Seek, time to value is very rapid. OT folks can get in there, start using it. But then as IT wants to move their data around or to the cloud, they can. And so it's an interesting way to have, I think, a very almost fun conversation with both leaders of OT and IT to say, oh, we can address both goals that you have. I mean, ultimately, they have the same goal. They want to make better products. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, Lisa, thank you for that. You see, we have some other chairs up here. Mm-hmm. So I think at this time, we're going to bring up our other panelists. So Mike Carroll, VP of Innovation from Georgia Pacific is going to join us. Rachelle Howard from Vertex Pharmaceuticals is going to join us. And John Dyck, CEO of Sesmi, is going to join us. Let's welcome them to the stage. For those couple of people in here that haven't met you yet, give us a quick intro.
Hi, I'm Mike Carroll. I brought no slide.
Okay. So that means an easy transition back to Rachelle.
All right, thank you. Hi, Rachelle Howard, work for Vertex Pharmaceuticals. I am an automation engineer. I'm a lead on our continuous manufacturing automation team, and I'm also a lead on our digital transformation program. So excited to join this panel today to talk a bit more about our analytics that we do have in our plant and where we're headed with analytics. So to start off with our manufacturing environments, it's actually a key place where I actually tend to overlook the analytics that we have in place, but they're pretty advanced. So the continuous manufacturing, some of the key benefits are that instead of having these batch processes where we have to go and test the material after each unit operation step and kind of prove the material's ready, and then before the material moves into the next unit operation. Now with continuous, we have all those analytical technologies, our process analytical technology, PAT, embedded within the lines. And so with these spectroscopy systems, with the advanced modeling and mathematics that we have in line doing the analysis, we're able to prove the product quality and demonstrate that it is ready for release at the end of manufacture. So we can have the individual materials going in at the top, coated tablets coming out at the bottom, and have them, for some of our products, we've proven out that we can have real-time release. So again, advanced analytics, modeling of our processes, and demonstrating that we have the right dissolution properties so that we don't have to send the physical tablets off to the lab to be tested. But even though it's real-time release, we have big delays in actually releasing because all the batch records are on paper. So that stacks of hundreds of paper need to circulate through all the different teams to get signed off before we can actually get the product shipped out. So this is where our digital transformation program comes in. And so as we go through, we can speak a little bit more to this, but really there, as we're standing up so many systems to digitalize our processes, wanting to focus on making sure that the data is going to work for us at the end of this and as we make incremental values through this program. And so we're focusing on the data management piece, figuring out what's the right balance for us. We're very immature in this space, so diving into some programs that have been recommended for us are far too immature for us to even know. People are figuring out what's the data steward. Like, we can't tell them to go off and do some very advanced modeling of our data systems. And then focusing on how can we bring value to the data we have now, get the right tools into the right hands of our people to be able to start to make some progress and to show some proof of concepts around what can we do, what problems can we solve, what investigations can we move forward as we move towards a little bit more of our advanced analytics use cases as well. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Welcome, Rachelle. John, introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, good afternoon. John Dyck, CEO of CESME, stands for the Clean Energy Smart Manufacturing Innovation Institute. I'd like to refer to ourselves more as the Smart Manufacturing Institute. We're focused on all of manufacturers in the US. We're kind of a unique type of organization. We're funded by the federal government, specifically the Department of Energy, and they've given us $140 million to spend in driving through the lens and through the function of smart manufacturing to create a more competitive manufacturing environment here in the US. And we do so by, as a private-public partnership, a consortia, to bring together the brightest minds, the most forward-looking manufacturers, technology providers, machine builders, systems integrators, consultants, and of course academia to, as an ecosystem, try to advance the state of smart manufacturing here in this country. It's more important today than it's ever been to ensure that manufacturing here in the US becomes more competitive and more secure and more resilient. So we do that by funding innovation, by funding. We started off when I first came to CESME about 4 years ago. We started off by doing the analysis to say, where is innovation actually happening in this space, in this kind of smart manufacturing space? And I think the results would be interesting to a lot of folks. I'm not here to talk about that today, but what I've displayed here on this slide is I think an important epiphany for those of us sort of that are paid to think big thoughts about this, or at least in theory, big thoughts about this stuff. We've been talking about the fourth industrial revolution now for 11 years. If I can be a little bit crass, I would characterize the progress that we've made in the last 11 years as a little bit of putting lipstick on the 3.0 pig, the industry 3.0 pig. And so this notion of the digital divide or crossing the chasm to me is really, really important. This ecosystem is kind of stuck, propagating legacy and historic methodologies and technologies and approaches. And a lot of the greatest manufacturers in this country are increasingly frustrated by where this ecosystem has sort of paused. Just a brief anecdote, if you take the Federal Reserve data on manufacturing productivity in the US over the last 11 years since we've announced this fourth industrial revolution, for the first time in recorded history, we've plateaued and then begun declining in terms of manufacturing productivity by worker here in the US. And so anyway, there are a lot of complex reasons for that, I get that, but I think one of them is the opportunity in front of us to truly, as an ecosystem, accelerate the move from our legacy, historic, and necessary journey from Industry 3.0 to Industry 4.0.
Excellent. Thank you, John. So, Rachelle, referring to the article I mentioned earlier and taking off on John's point there, in that interview with Chemical Processing Magazine, I think the question was, what change are you trying to drive? What will you bring? And your answer, paraphrasing, was that getting at data is too hard, that we've got to figure out ways to automate this connectivity and pulling in data. If we can't have advanced analytics, if we can't get to the data, or it's biased, or it's incomplete. So, and then you ended that interview with saying we have too many of what you call data graveyards. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit and what you're doing at Vertex to get out of that trap.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me, because that was a while ago, but we are still in the same situation, so I still very much feel this way. As I mentioned, we are working towards putting in digital solutions and systems, so we're early days just getting off of paper, so that's just a start of actually having data into a digital format that's even usable. We had solutions in place in our plant that were kind of checking the box of, yes, we're doing our job to archive the data, but it was getting put into places where it was no longer accessible. Like, it was just getting tucked away, but it wasn't being exposed with the right tools on top of it to actually be able to enable our teams to use it. And so we have programs in place now where we're putting in the digital systems. We're looking at the data management aspects of this, of, yes, you have these particular workflows you're building, but what are some of the analyses we're going to want to do down the line? We don't know all of them, but can we just start that thought process now and get our teams thinking a little bit about that thought process so the data can be built up in a clean way, so that just trying to avoid some of the traps that are easy to get into with, well, this is what I call the equipment on the shop floor, okay, but it's called something else in a different system. Let's like harmonize on the names so that we're just removing that barrier when we get to the next stages of the ease of putting the data and making it link back together. So, and some things that are probably very, I don't know, maybe common knowledge or like obvious to those who are a little farther along, but things that we have to teach our teams and kind of reshift that focus of, it's not worth it to go really fast if you're going to get there and then have to redo the data element, because our goals around this are getting to the data and being able to do more with it. So that's some of the places we're at right now, is just really focusing on keeping data as like a motivator for when we're solving the other problems of just getting some systems into people's hands, making a better place to work, having improved compliance, a lot of different motivations for a digital program, but making sure that the data is the focus of this as well.
Right. So Lisa, from a software supplier standpoint, I'm sure this is something common that your team runs into, of the challenges of where is the data, can we get at the data?
Absolutely, and I think what it boils down to, having a well-defined data strategy is really helpful. And I would say the place where things tend to fall down a little bit is less around the process data itself, those flow rates, temperatures, pressures, and more around that contextual data or the offline analytical data. And so, especially in batch processes where you take a sample, split it 9 ways, run it through 9 different instruments, and how do you tie back all of that analysis to that time point that you can then overlay with the process flows and temperatures. And so it's encouraging to see the industry starting to lean in with technology solutions, but I think there's a ways to go.
There's a ways to go, no doubt. We've heard that this week. So, quick story, John and I actually met, I think, 2010, somewhere in that time frame. John was working for Rockwell at the time. I was working for Meridian at the time, and both of our organizations wanted us to be involved in the MESA group and helping to drive innovation, helping to drive knowledge sharing. And John contacts me by email, welcome to MESA. Oh, by the way, Bob, we have a project we're working on called the MESA Guidebook. There's going to be one on APM, and you're going to be one of the authors.
He was voluntold.
Yes, voluntold, thank you. At that time, though, John, I mean, there were those that saw the bigger vision, even in my organization at that time, but there were some that were, well, how much are we going to share? You know, how big is the tent going to open here to our, patented proprietary stuff? So that's where I wanted to take the conversation next, is this hurdle that we're trying to get over. Let's talk a little bit about that, open standards, your vision, and what is the driving forces that is going to move us to that next stage that you're out advocating and evangelizing for, from the old legacy proprietary, we're going to keep it in the lockbox, to this more open environment that actually enables analytics to be activated?
Yeah, so that would be a long conversation in and of itself, but I'll start here by saying one of the hallmarks of Industry 3.0 was that kind of growth from out of the sort of hydraulics and pneumatics to relays to PLCs to firmware to information systems, and along the way we maintained our proprietary perspective on networks and data structures and access to data. And so a lot of the folks that make devices are still, at least have made devices across the last set of decades, are still kind of thinking in that proprietary mode. And just now beginning to think perhaps that maybe that's not a differentiating feature. Maybe the end users, maybe we ought to listen to the end users, the manufacturers themselves, and try to think about think about new ways of creating value for our organizations. So if you do listen to the manufacturers, and I'll invite the folks on the panel here to chime in as well, interoperability. I mean, you talked about the sort of basic challenge of these data silos and stovepipe architectures. That's necessary because there is no alternative today. But as an ecosystem, and this is part of the work that we're investing in aggressively at Sesame, is to bring the brightest minds together, the subject matter experts, those that are equally concerned about this historic proprietary legacy approach, and work together to drive interoperability. And frankly, it's the large Fortune 1000 manufacturing leadership that are aggressively behind this vision of interoperability through not standards. We've got a pretty bad reputation for standards in this space, don't we? I mean, again, back to that, I'm a technology provider, and I'm going to create a standards body for my ecosystem, and they'll create their body for their ecosystem, and that's no longer effective. That's not sufficient. But interoperability, by bringing those groups together to create essentially de facto standards that you can invest in and that you can refine and extend for yourselves, and then bring into the marketplace. So it's not a short-term strategy, but there is absolutely enormous demand for interoperability in this space, and there's a maturity model in and of itself for that interoperability, but that's how we've got to, I think, be thinking about the future.
There's a word we need to learn to pronounce. No. We need to say no. No more.
Yeah. Well said.
So let's expand on that a little bit, Mike. No meaning.
I don't know how to be any simpler than that. You just have
meaning
to say
that
no.
when a solution provider comes in, you're going to put in the RFP. This is my expectations, and if you're going to try to come in and present to me this older paradigm of closed systems and connectivity issues, no.
Well, you have to know where you're going, right? You talked about understanding what you want to do with the data, but you also have to know where you're going to go to start with, right? The whole goal here is if we don't all learn to create value at the rate data is created, your assets are going to become somebody else's and your name's not going to be the same. And so that's where we're headed. Now, how do you go do that, right? And so you have to say no, because at some point in order to do that, you have to orchestrate. And the only way to orchestrate is to have access to the data, right? And so once you have that, you can orchestrate. But in order to do that, you have to be able to have an architecture that allows you to do that, which means you have to have interchangeability and interoperability between the applications and the hardware, right? So you don't care whose hardware it is, you don't care whose application it is, and you all want to pull out your phone, right? You want to take a look at your phone, right? Because that's the kind of world you're going to live in, where when you don't like the application, what do?
You look for another one.
You look for another one. When you don't like your phone, what do? You find the next best version, right? That will be the world that we all live in. Guess what persists? The data. And it gets loaded onto your next phone. The only way we make that happen is we learn to say enough, no, right? We have to say no.
Got it.
It's not that hard.
It is not.
We're saying no. Steve's sitting in the back area. He's gonna shake his head and say, "Yeah, we're saying no. We're not gonna accept these systems anymore."
But it
Right?
has to be a combined effort, right? People need to put their heads together. The big companies saying no have some power, but the smaller companies, like, we need to all band together. I think we're seeing a little bit of this, whether you like it or don't love it, but it's still a right movement in the right way with like Bioforum and latching onto MTP and some of the standards there. It's at least a move in the right direction and people getting vendors on board to get some of that standardization in place.
And so there's a lot of stuff you can do. And you talk about the device world where instruments, a lot of instrument architecture says, the data leaves the instrument, goes out to their cloud, and then they may send it back to you after they try and monetize it, right? You have to say no, right? The data's ours, right? Yes, sir. Right?
You should sell the data.
Yeah, well, the data's ours. I can let you have the data after I get it, right? And you can try and monetize it if I think it creates value for me. If it doesn't, I'm not going to buy it from you, right? But the data is ours, and you have to learn to have a firm understanding. The other thing is the exposure that you get from a cybersecurity risk and just from a risk of not having that service if something goes offline on their cloud that you're not in control of. That's a problem. Don't expose yourself to that. Say no.
Okay, Mike, let's just keep that going.
I'd love to keep talking, but I think Bob wants a few other questions.
No, go ahead, John. Let's keep that going. Jump in.
Yeah, so on Tuesday, and I would invite both of you, if you're interested. On Tuesday, SESME is launching the Smart Manufacturing Executive Council, and Matt Littlefield will play a role in there as well. But there are at this point, 20 Fortune 500 manufacturers from P&G, from ExxonMobil, from PepsiCo, Toyota, Ford, GM, General Mills, Honeywell, Raytheon, Linde, et cetera, that are all committed to saying no and to saying yes to organizations across this ecosystem that are behind and advocating for this idea of interoperability and these principles that we're talking about here. So our job at SESME, together with our partners at SME, the Society of Manufacturing Engineers, is to give this growing group, hand-selected, but growing group of manufacturing executives that have technology and business experience and OT and IT experience to say no, to advocate for these ideas at congressional briefings, in venues like this, with the media, with the analyst organizations around the country. I'm at the White House on Monday speaking about exactly these things, because this is an ecosystem issue that's preventing this country from becoming more competitive. That productivity curve.
Yeah. What's at risk is you cannot go orchestrate, which means you can't create value at the rate you create data.
Yep.
That's what's at risk.
we're a little passionate about this. I hadn't met him until we began preparing for this panel, but I think the passion's there.
And I love it. I think it's great. Too many of these conversations get monotone and boring and disappear into text messages and LinkedIn posts, and there's not enough action. And that's what this panel is about. So let's move to one of my pet peeves. My no is I don't want to talk about systems and dashboards. I want to talk about outcomes. I want to talk about results. So Mike, maybe you could talk a bit about the slide that Matt opened the conference with the analytics journey. And a few years ago we were missing this. Everybody said predictive, and then preventative, predictive, and then we got into this idea of self-learning prognostics. Is that still future, or is that happening now?
No, I think in the application of it's happening now, and I think that if you take and you reconstruct yourself in the way that you operate, right, and you take this IT OT convergence stuff seriously, right, and by seriously I mean that you stop asking permission to go create value, right, because that's what we do, right, is that if you're an operator, right, you'll go to the IT organization and say, sir, can I have permission to go create value with the physical assets that I'm in charge of, because you're in charge of the digital part of it. And he'll say, well, let me think about it, which means he's got to go build something for you, because you're not built from an infrastructure and architecture perspective that allows that to happen, right? And your organization is not configured that allows that to happen, right? And so you don't necessarily have to have all the automation built to allow that to happen. What you need to do is reconfigure yourselves so you're built around the outcomes when you have a delivery mechanism that's outcome focused organizationally to start with. If you get that right, and Steve's in the back of the room, and we've gotten that right. And so if you look at the difference between what we used to be and what we are today, getting that right changes your entire perspective. Go get that right, and then the software piece is just the easy piece, right? Then you just automate all that stuff, and so that separates you. Learn how to do it as an organization first, and then close the gap with the software.
Right. So on that, Lisa, as you have been, you've been CEO for about a year now, and you've been out in industries that maybe you weren't exposed to previously, coming from more of the pharma world. So what have you seen that sort of defines analytics to action outcomes that have been driven as you've been meeting customers out there?
Okay, great question. And I was just talking to Bob earlier that I had the opportunity to present at CERAWeek, so a very big oil and gas conference. So about as far away from pharma as I could get from, acronyms and everything else that's out there. So what I will say that's interesting, and having been at that conference and listening here and some of the other input that we get, there is such an opportunity to move away from each department having their goals. Back to your question, like, hey, can I go get your permission to go do this part, right? Well, if there's not a shared common goal, that's the starting point. So what is the business outcome? So what has a lot of industries right now really fired up? Sustainability. Why? Because that is an obvious outcome that needs to happen. And there's accountability to drive that. So there's an urgency that's coming. As soon as we see this urgency, all of a sudden this internal, but this is what my department's supposed to do, kind of starts to fall away, because that business urgency should drive an outcome. And from that outcome, you can start having collaboration. And I agree with Mike, then the technology, the solutions, there's a natural way forward. But as long as we keep approaching this idea of, well, here's what IT is supposed to get done, and here's what OT is going to do, and procurement gets graded on if they can save 15 or 20%. And so the debates are around, how does this thing help a goal? That's not actually what needs to happen to stay competitive. So I think it starts there. I also think it starts with not thinking that there's an easy button. Oh, I know. Let's go get an AI piece of software. let's go install AI, hit the easy button, and it's going to somehow replace all of our subject matter experts, right?
Get out the shovel. You're digging your grave.
Right? Let's not do that. Let's re-entrench the investment we've made in people, but remove the bureaucracy and the obstacles of how to fund their own innovation. The people in our companies are innovators. It's there. It's happening. And I think to your point, Mike, it's some of the other stuff we got to work on.
Amen.
So just to jump in here.
Please.
And we do have teams full of innovators. So making sure that they understand what the goals are, but not limiting them to, this is what we're solving, or this is the problem we're focusing on, or the outcome we're focusing on. But there's all kinds of day-to-day problems, and we have a lot of really innovative team members. So just getting the data available to them, it's amazing what people will come up with. So just giving them the bandwidth to be able to go and explore, and all of a sudden they're solving problems that you didn't really know existed, but actually do add up to really making a difference in the bottom line. So just making that exposure, just having that democratization of the data, it is all really valuable, just to have that little bit of space for people to solve problems that they know exist that maybe not everyone knows.
So there's a perception, right? Everybody gets bombarded with people coming in, because you said AI, coming in and they say to you, I can give you actionable intelligence, or I can give you actionable insights. And they come at the door every day. And I got to the point that I actually look at them and I say, you think that's my problem? You think I don't know what to go do? And then they don't know how to react, right? Because I said, I do know what to go do. My problem is I have so many of them. If you give me more, that makes my problem worse. My problem is prioritization amongst all those things. If you can't solve that for me, you're not helping me, right? And so I think part of it lands on us. Many of these vendors don't really understand what our problems are, right? They think our problems are not knowing what to go do. We actually know what to go do, right? It's the prioritization problem we struggle with, and then it's the capability to do something about those priorities, right? That we really struggle with as well. And so we probably need to be clearer about those things with the vendor community, rather than sitting and listening to them tell us, I can give you actionable insights you can't do anything about.
Just real briefly, Tom Comstock said something really important this morning that I think enables this outcome-driven dialogue that the manufacturers are desperate for. That infrastructure that's complex, right, and not simple and not sexy, and nobody wants to pay for it, that's what enables outcomes. Today, most manufacturers come out with an RFP, and we want to solve this problem, and you find the right vendor, and you hardwire the information model, the infrastructure, the data ingestion and storage and contextualization and the application, and they're all kind of stovepiped, and they're all purpose-built for that RFP. So when you want to solve another problem for another outcome, guess what? You got to start from scratch all over again. That just don't scale.
You got to build something else.
Yep.
And that is the biggest problem we all face, is that those applications, right, have to be replicated instead of scale.
Exactly. And every piece of that stack underneath. Yeah.
I want to add to that. So the other piece, as soon as we hardwire things, right, locked in, well, good engineers, it's sort of speed of thought, right? They have there's a thought process. Oh, I like this. Let me check that. Let me pull that up. Oh, wait a second. Oh, I should have looked at that. Where's that information? To Rachelle's comment, access to that data, the ability to let that creative thought process happen in whatever applications are being used, so that you can then go back to that and build on it and add to it and change it. It's not hardwired in. It's more of a way to support that creative thought process that
in a sanctioned, secure, scalable way, right?
That's exactly
That's right. Let's pull into our audience at this point. Want to make sure we have time for Q&A. There are LNS team members that have microphones, so if you have a question for our panel here, raise your hand, and let's get some Q&A going.
Yeah, this is specifically for John. John, did you look into the open group to use that standard? I mean, you mentioned about standards and how you're kind of anti-standards, but you're creating your own standards or best practices, but did you either leverage what they're doing in Open Group, or did you investigate what they're doing, and why aren't you using them then for your practice?
Yeah, so we have looked at standards across the board. We've done a fair bit of analysis of the standards. We are getting behind some standards like NQTT, Spark Plug B, and OPC UA in terms of information modeling standards. There are a few other standards that we're supporting and advocating for. We're also working with organizations that aren't standards bodies, like we're not standards bodies, to do something now at the pace that manufacturing is evolving now. Because like I said, these standards bodies historically have spent too many years pondering and thinking and writing and not being adopted. Even the great organizations, for PACML, right? Great example. P&G, we work with P&G closely. They were a big part of PACML. What's the adoption rate of PACML? It was developed as a great standard, but if the entire ecosystem, the machine builders, systems integrators, technology providers, and manufacturers aren't part of that process, the adoption will never be reach critical mass. And so all that just to say that we're working with, from our perspective, some of the greatest organizations in the world that get these problems, right? There's the VDMA, the association out of Europe, that's convening 600 machine builders around the world to build information models for machine classes, asset classes, process types and categories, as just one little example, right? We're trying to do that at the speed of business and try to bring some of those ideas into the US because, frankly, interoperability isn't a German problem or a French problem or a US problem. It's a global challenge, right? And then how do we inspire the technology providers and machine builders to sort of get on this bandwagon as quickly as possible? It's through the idea of Mike's here to say no to those that aren't engaging and advancing the cause and the agenda of those that are.
Next question. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Tony Huffman with Molex. Question for John. I wonder if there's a kind of a point of no return. We've got all these companies, they've been after this transformation, like you said, since 2011. They're all building their own building blocks. They're putting everything together. When do you feel like we've kind of lost that ability to standardize and to scale and to create the one version of this future smart factory design?
So I think we're at an inflection point right now. I learned that Mike's company is actually putting their money where their mouth is. They're saying no. What they're saying is for every machine we buy going forward, Koch Industries, along with VW and a few others that I could name, they're saying we're not going to buy another machine or another technology provider that doesn't do this. So we're here to create a stage and a platform for those organizations to amplify that and help understand the value of this new way of doing things. And that's a flywheel effect, right? We're truly at an inflection point right now. That chasm is now. And our appeal, I think, from a US standpoint, is to bring every part of this ecosystem forward, and those that for whatever reason choose not to, they'll, what do they say about the ash heap of history? I think you said it before, right? They're not going to be around tomorrow. So anyway, I think we have a few years now. This won't happen quickly, but we do have a few years now to engage this ecosystem and invest in ways that will allow us to be what we need to be.
The ash heap of history is littered with good intentions.
Yes, it is.
Okay, we have time for about one more question. Who's next? Thank you, Jason. Yes, in the middle. Go ahead.
Owen Kiley, Thermo Fisher. What is interoperability in your mind? Like, when I look at a piece of equipment, like, oh, it has OPC UA, it's interoperable. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, what defines interoperability? Like, when do I say yes, I guess? Somebody got to say yes to something. Yeah, how do you assess that? And leave that to anyone up there.
Take it, Mike.
So the way I think about it is if you go all the way down to the DCS world, all the way up through the architecture, right? The way I think about it is on the infrastructure, any device that you stand up, right, is configured by the operational organization, and it works at scale. That means you have to build the infrastructure and architecture that allows you to do that, right? So if you want to change that to a different vendor, right, because you like his device better, or if you want to run multiple devices, right, on the same infrastructure, right, that populates data into the architecture, you can do that. That's interoperability, right? It's also interchangeability among devices. It also means that if I have an application, and you just talked about building them, that if I figure out a better way to go do something, I can put a different application in that architecture, use the data, right, and just run a different application, and it scales across the entire enterprise because I've reconstructed myself in a way that allows me to scale an application at will, which means I don't have to ask permission to create value. All I have to say is I have an idea, I'm going to create value. I don't have to use the words use case. So one of the things I want everybody to get used to is that the words use case is the largest trap you'll ever get in, right? Because that means you are prioritizing in a linear fashion something into an exponential domain, right? You're suboptimized from the very beginning, and you'll never catch up. So if you construct yourself in the
That's
right way,
how you end up with all those boxes on your shop floor, right?
And if you construct yourself in the right way, so that IT is responsible for the infrastructure and architecture, right, that allows the operations organization to go configure their devices and their architecture, stand up and create value as they need to without asking permission, then everything works.
Fantastic.
Ditto.
Right on. Okay, before Matt comes up and closes this out, Mike, I think you had an assignment or an exercise you wanted to...
Oh, yeah. So everybody's got a piece of paper in front of you, right? And there's one thing I want to say. Real time is coming for you, right? If you're an operator. Real time's coming for you. How many people remember Garmin? Mm-hmm. Right? Remember, it used to reside on your dash? Open your phone and see if you can find Garmin as an app on your phone.
I have it.
Right? You have Garmin as an app on your phone for your watch.
It's my heart rate monitor and sports data.
Yeah, but it's not a GPS.
It is not.
Right? And so here's the deal. Real time killed Garmin, right, because it's traffic. Real time is coming to our operations. And so we have to be able to deal in real time, right, just the way, otherwise it's going to kill us the way it killed Garmin. So what I want you to do is I want you to take your pad in front of you, and there's one thing that you took away from this event that you're going to go do. I don't know what it is, or if I can tell you what it is, right? Right? If you want me to, I want you to write it down on that piece of paper before you leave here. Right now, write it down.
John?
Are you done, Mike, or am I interrupting you? Awesome. So 30 seconds. If we achieve this objective of interoperability, we'll actually do something really, really important, in fact, vital for U.S. manufacturing, and that is enable small, medium manufacturers to engage in this disruptive journey in ways that they can't today, right? 98.6% of all manufacturing companies in this country are considered small, medium, and guess what? In my career at GE and Rockwell and a small startup called Active Plant, I never once intentionally called on a small, medium-sized manufacturer. And why is that? Because they couldn't afford my stuff, and I couldn't afford to sell to a single site, right? So this stuff has to be relevant to them. This stuff has to be applicable to them. And if we don't walk on this journey together with interoperability, which drives down cost and complexity, we're not going to bring the small, medium manufacturers along with us. And guess what that does for your supply chains?
Great. Thank you, John. Let's thank Lisa and Seek for supporting this closing panel and our panelists. Give them a hand, everybody. I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope this was a tremendous success, as much as it was for us as for you. It was a great week. So much inspired conversation. I did write down what I have to do. I was voluntold by John to join the Smart Manufacturing group, so I'm looking forward to learning more about that and participating. Thank you to our speakers, presenters, panelists, everyone at LNS behind the scenes that made this possible. A big round of applause for everyone, please. And then a special thank to our sponsors. Thank you very much. Okay, well, 2023, it's going to be here before we know it. Boston's my hometown. It has quickly become a hub for industrial transformation, technology, insights, thought leadership. We hope to welcome you back here a year from now. And so thank you very much. Thank you to Mike for putting those action items on each of your pads. Your LNS teams will be calling you to check in on those over the coming weeks, and we hope you're successful. And we look forward to the continued discussions. Thank you very much.